And what if I told you the chains of slavery were never broken? They just became invisible, that the pain of the whips, the muffled screams inside the slave quarters, and the forced silence of the master's house still echo, generation after generation. If you're black, or if you know someone who is, this story is already a part of you, even if no one ever told it out loud. In the next few minutes, you're going to understand how the past shapes the present, and why freedom was never truly complete. Get ready, because what comes next might forever change the way you see Brazil. When we talk about slavery, most people picture chains, slave quarters, whipping posts, and overseers with leather lashes. It almost always comes with a sense of distance, as if it all happened a very long time ago, as if it belonged to another Brazil, another era, another people. But what if that distance is just an illusion? What if the past wasn't buried, just embedded? Slavery didn't end when the Golden Law was signed. What ended was the legality of violence, but its effects remained, and still remain, deeply rooted in the bodies, minds, and souls of those who came after. The trauma of slavery isn't limited to what the eyes witnessed or what books chose to record. It was passed down like an invisible virus, shaping fears, molding behavior, silently corroding self-worth. That's why we need to talk about inherited pain. Imagine someone living inside a slave hut, no name of their own, no voice, no right to say no. Sleeping on cold dirt, working until their body bled, watching their child get sold, their wife get raped, their father get axed at the post. Now imagine this person survives. They live on, but something inside them dies. Something they can't bury. A pain so massive it can't be held in just one body, so it spills onto their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren. This kind of trauma doesn't go away with time. It adapts, it hides, but it stays. Science has already proven that painful memories can be passed on genetically, a field called epigenetics, where extreme experiences change how the body functions and leave physical marks on descendants. So when we talk about the trauma of slavery, we're not talking about some abstract emotional drama. We're talking about real wounds that affect how someone sees themselves, how they respond to authority, how they process fear, how they relate to others, and most of all, how they love or allow themselves to be loved. Many descendants of enslaved people carry, without even knowing it, a chronic sense of not belonging, like they're always out of place, like they don't deserve to be where they are. Have you ever seen a black child growing up in a white neighborhood look down when they walk into a store? Ever seen a young black man feel guilty for dreaming too big? That's often not individual insecurity. It's the echo of centuries of oppression. It's the voice of the slave quarters whispering, "Don't you dare sit at the master's table. You weren't born for that." This pain is silent, but constant. And it moves through generations like an unopened letter, a message passed down without words. Slavery in Brazil lasted over 300 years. The system was built to erase everything that made an enslaved person feel human: their original name, their religion, their history, their language, their lineage. It was a kidnapping, not just of bodies, but of identity. And when you steal someone's past, you also steal their future. Think about it. How many black people in Brazil know the name of their African great-grandfather? Almost none. Most don't know the village, the lineage, the people, or the culture that birthed them. It's like being born inside a maze. No map, no exit, not even the knowledge that you're trapped. And that feeling of rootlessness feeds deep insecurities. It creates a kind of emptiness that school, TV, or job titles can't fill. Brazilian society has never made peace with its slave-holding past. On the contrary, it hides it, disguises it, wraps it up in speeches about racial democracy that ignore the pain. And that silence comes with heavy consequences. For example, why does a black boy, hearing everyone is equal, still always end up the last one picked at school? Why are black women hypersexualized or made invisible? Why do top corporate positions almost never include black people? These aren't coincidences. They're the results of a structure that was never dismantled, only repackaged. The slave quarters became the favelas. The whipping post became the police car. The overseer became the system. And those who inherit all this pain don't always know where it comes from. They just feel it. My grandma told me not to speak too loud around white folks. My mom warned me not to run in the street, so I wouldn't be mistaken for a thief. My dad told me I had to be twice as good to get half the respect. These sentences cross generations. They're survival rules, passed down with love and fear. Love, because our ancestors wanted to protect us. Fear, because they knew the world was still dangerous for bodies like ours. Even without visible chains in the square, the weight of those voices still shapes us. It builds a posture, a distrust, a tension that most people don't even notice, but it's always there. A lot of people say, but that's in the past. Why bring it up now? The answer is simple, because what isn't remembered gets repeated, and what's denied never gets healed. Forgetting slavery is letting it keep working in the shadows. Denying the trauma is condemning new generations to carry a pain that was never theirs, but was handed to them without a choice. It's when an entire people go through such deep collective violence that it becomes part of the culture, part of the language, part of the behavior. And in Brazil, the historical trauma of slavery has never been addressed. There was no collective mourning, no institutional apology, no reparations. There was silence, there was intentional forgetting, there was denial. And all of this still weighs, today, on the shoulders of millions of black people who carry guilt that was never theirs to begin with. But maybe now, something different is beginning. For the first time, the pain is being spoken out loud. For the first time, the questions are being asked. For the first time, the children of the slave quarters are writing their own story. And that's where our real journey begins. Because understanding how the trauma of slavery passes from generation to generation isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's an act of healing, a real cry for freedom. But what if I told you that this pain isn't just in the soul, but in the DNA itself, that science has already uncovered physical marks of slavery in the descendants of those who lived through that horror? What comes next will show you that slavery never really ended. It just learned how to live inside us. Get ready to dive into the darkest journey in history, the path of the slave ships. Before the slave quarters, there was the hold. Before the whipping post, there was the hold. Before any lash, there was the sea, a sea of pain, blood, and silence, the silence of the slave ships. Imagine sitting at home with your family at night, hearing the familiar sounds of the village, eating what you gathered that day, at peace. Now imagine screams in the dark, fires lighting up the sky, running, chaos, your children ripped from your arms, chains, slaps, guns, all in a language you've never heard before. Everything taken from you in minutes, your freedom, your story, your name. That's how the nightmare began for millions of Africans, the slave ships. Men, women, and children were hunted like animals. Some were sold by other African groups allied with Europeans. Others were captured by force. They were taken to ports like Elmina, Gorée, Ouidah, where they spent days or even weeks locked in dungeons, without light, without sanitation, waiting for their turn to board toward the unknown. Those ports still exist, and they smell like death. The stone walls absorbed the cries of thousands. Then came the boarding, chains on their ankles, shackles on their wrists. Some fought back, screamed, tried to escape. Others just closed their eyes, knowing it wouldn't matter. From the port to the hold, from the hold to oblivion. The slave ships weren't ships, they were floating machines of destruction. Each ship carried between 300 and 600 people. Most were stacked like cargo, because that's what they were treated as. Tied side by side, unable to move, unable to sit, never seeing daylight. For weeks, sometimes months, they lived like that. They relieved themselves where they lay. The stench was unbearable, the air suffocating. Diseases spread fast: dysentery, scurvy, typhoid fever. It's estimated that 1 in every 5 people died on the way. Yes, 20% of all bodies became food for fish in the middle of the ocean. And if anyone refused to eat, they were whipped. If they screamed, they were silenced with blows. If they died, they were thrown into the sea. No name, no grave, no mourning. Meanwhile, in Europe and Brazil, landowners were placing orders for pieces. Yes, they called human beings pieces, as if they were objects. I want a shipment of 50, 30 men, 20 women. The men must be strong, the women young. It was a profitable business. Portugal, England, France, Spain, they all grew rich off the human trade. And Brazil alone received nearly 5 million enslaved Africans. Almost half of all those ripped from Africa came here. It's as if Brazil swallowed half of the world's trauma and then tried to pretend it never happened. Even in this hell, there was resistance. Many women chose to throw themselves into the sea with their babies in their arms, rather than let them grow up enslaved. Others fought back, attacked crew members with anything they could hide. Some sang in African tongues, trying to keep a thread of humanity alive. Some ships were taken over by enslaved people in revolt. One of them, the famous La Amistad, became a global symbol of resistance, but most were defeated by exhaustion, by pain, by time. Inside the ship, you stopped being a person. Men were separated from their wives. Children torn from their mothers, their native language banned, African clothes ripped off, hair shaved off, their names erased. They became a number, a piece. Some travelers of that time described the holds as human pigsties. But not even pigs were treated like that. Some went mad during the trip, some screamed for days and then just stopped breathing, and others survived. But surviving wasn't the same as living. It meant dying slowly, from the inside out. The Atlantic Ocean is the world's largest graveyard. Millions of Africans lie at the bottom of the sea, nameless, crossless, flowerless. Every drop of that sea carries blood. Every wave is an unheard cry. And still, for centuries, ships kept crossing the ocean, always full on the way out, returning full of gold, sugar, coffee, cotton, all produced with the sweat and blood of those who survived. The economy of the Brazilian colony, and later the empire, was built on corpses. Those who survived the slave ship arrived in Brazil broken, physically, mentally, spiritually. And that was just the beginning of slavery. Still to come, beatings, the slave quarters, rape, auctions, child separation, dehumanization. But the ship was where it all began. That's where the silence entered. Silence imposed by pain, humiliation, and shame. That silence was passed down. It became a family secret, an emptiness in conversations, I don't know where I come from. And the most cruel part, many black people began to feel guilty just for being alive. As if the pain of those who were lost was a burden they must carry. As if their very existence was a debt, not a legacy. Because you can't heal what you can't see. As long as Brazilians don't look at the slave ships with the seriousness they deserve, we will keep inheriting the consequences of silence. Every classroom without a black teacher, every favela left to rot, every unjustified police stop, every racist joke, every boardroom without a black face is an extension of the ship's hold. If we want to change the present, we need to confront that past. No filter, no romance, no denial. But the ship's hold was just the start. because once their feet hit solid ground, their bodies were still breathing. But their souls began to die again. In the next chapter, you'll enter the reality of the slave quarters, where the body was the battlefield and the whip was the judge of life and death. There was no lock stronger than fear, and to install fear, the master knew exactly where to strike. The slave quarters weren't just a place, they were a symbol, a daily reminder that your body wasn't yours, that you were worth less than the ox, that the sun didn't rise so you could live. It rose so you could serve. That's where the enslaved person slept. That's where the enslaved person cried. And that's where many times they died. The slave quarters were simple structures made of mud and sticks, with no windows and barely any airflow. People slept on packed dirt, sometimes on straw, most of the time on nothing. Dozens of people crammed into spaces that could barely fit 20. The smell was overpowering. Mosquitoes, lice, disease. There was no privacy, no hygiene. The nights were broken by coughing, moaning, whispered forbidden prayers, and the constant fear of being dragged out to the whipping post. Yes, the whipping post, the most perverse symbol of slavery, the altar of pain. The whipping post was used to punish, to humiliate, and above all, to teach others what happens to those who disobey, to those who walk too slowly, to those who dare make eye contact with the overseer, to those who love someone without permission. The person was tied to the post, a block of wood fixed to the ground, their hands and feet restrained, their back exposed, and then came the whip. The whip was braided leather, often tipped with metal, glass, or bone. Each strike cut the skin like a knife. After 5, 10, 20 lashes, the back was no longer skin, it was raw flesh. And the cruelest part, each overseer had total freedom to choose the punishment. No law, no limit, no consequence. Some beat people until they passed out. Others preferred psychological torture, tied to the post for days, hung upside down, ants, pepper, or urine poured into open wounds. All of it to send one message: you're not human, you're mine. Let's name this pain, because it had a face, and tears, and life. 1856, rural farm in Bahia. A 14-year-old girl was whipped for dropping a plate. She was tied under the midday sun with stones on her shoulders. 3 days later, she still couldn't speak. She wouldn't eat. She survived, but never smiled again. Letter from a plantation owner, 1822. Runaway Negro was recaptured and punished with 100 lashes. I left him there for the others to see, so they know that freedom is just an illusion for them. Oral testimony, Quilombo of Palmares. Before escaping, my grandmother told me, if I die, I'll die free, but if I stay, I'll die a little every day. These stories weren't exceptions. They were the rule, and they were legalized, normalized, encouraged. Constant surveillance. During the day, enslaved people worked under the eyes of overseers. They walked in lines, obeyed whistle commands. Any movement outside of what was expected was a sign of rebellion. And rebellion meant punishment. A direct gaze, a whispered word between siblings, a song sung in an African tongue, a nodding head in the heat of the field. All of it could land you at the post. And there was no defense, no witness, because enslaved people weren't considered citizens. They had no right to speak, no right to sue, no right to complain. They were property, and property doesn't argue. Enslaved black women suffered even more. They were seen as tools for work and for pleasure. Rape was routine. Slave owners sexually abused enslaved women with zero consequence. And the result, even more pain. Rejected, fatherless children, women forced to work through pregnancies, girls forcibly initiated in adolescence. How many Brazilian bloodlines began with rape? How many families were born of violence? How many times did blood spill and no one saw? Sexual violence was so normalized that many black women didn't even realize it was wrong. Worse, they were blamed. If they got pregnant, It was their fault. If they resisted, they were beaten. If they cried, they were ignored. Punishment wasn't the exception, it was the system. There were rules, records, charts. Late to work, 20 lashes, escaped 100. Talked back to the overseer, whipping post and isolation. Complained, public punishment. Some were beaten in the morning and forced to work in the afternoon, with open wounds on their backs. No rest, no care, no medicine. Many died days later, from infection, fever, or internal bleeding, and the plantation owner simply replaced them. Because black people weren't names, they were numbers. The scars from the whip lasted forever, deep marks across backs, arms, and legs. Some older black men were called riscados, scratched, like books of pain written on skin. And what did those scars teach? Don't dream, don't resist, obey, but not everyone obeyed. Even through torture, even while bleeding, some smiled at the overseer, some sang, some escaped, some died on their feet. They said black people were savage because they fought back, but it was the opposite. They fought back because they were human. Even with all the punishments, there were still those who taught African languages in secret, those who danced in hidden yards, those who loved, married, had children. They couldn't own anything, but they still had each other. And that the master could never take. Because all of this violence left invisible legacies. The fear of speaking up, the fear of making mistakes, the feeling that you have to work twice as hard to be accepted, the belief that you'll never be good enough, the shame of your body, the silence in the face of pain. All of it was born at the whipping post, in the slave quarters, through the lash, and it lives on today, disguised as shyness, low self-esteem, submission. But if the body was whipped, the spirit was erased in another way, through the destruction of culture, faith, names, and language. In the next chapter, you'll see how slavery tried to erase everything that allowed a people to recognize themselves, and how that symbolic death still echoes today. Take the name, ban the language, smash the mirror. That's how you erase a people, without having to kill all of them. Imagine waking up one day and no longer being allowed to speak your own language. Not being able to say your name. Not being allowed to pray the way you've always prayed. And if you dared to do any of those things, you were beaten. Now imagine that. Not for a day, but for centuries. That's exactly what happened to millions of Africans kidnapped and enslaved in Brazil. They didn't just lose their freedom, they lost their identity. From the moment they stepped onto Brazilian soil, the message was clear. Unlearn who you are. Become what we want you to be. The enslaved were forced to abandon their African names, take Christian names given by priests or plantation owners, be baptized against their will, pray in Latin, accept a European, white and distant god, the stolen name. A name is the first mirror of a person. It carries history, ancestry, belonging. For the enslaved, that mirror was shattered as soon as they arrived. Names like Olufemi, Amara, Kwame, Zuberi, all erased. In their place came João, Maria, José, Benedito, names imposed by those who wanted Africa forgotten. Many were also given surnames based on plantations, slave owners, or towns. That's why so many black Brazilians today have last names like Dos Santos, De Jesus, Da Silva, or Pereira. Not because they chose them, but because they were renamed by force. The silenced language. Many Africans spoke rich languages like Yoruba, Kikongo, Fon, Mandinga, Hausa. These languages carried ancestral wisdom, folk tales, prayers, and survival codes. In Brazil, these languages were banned. Speaking in African was punished. It was seen as an act of rebellion, witchcraft, heresy. Once again, silence was enforced, and with it came forgetting. Children of Africans were born and never learned the language of their parents. The language died with the next generation, and with the language, the memory. The demonized faith Africans arrived in Brazil with powerful religions. The worship of Orixás and Quisis, vodans, spiritual systems rooted in nature, ancestry, and the body. But the colonizers saw these practices as evil. Temples were destroyed, altars were burned, religious leaders were whipped, enslaved people were forced to kneel before Catholic saints. But not all bowed. Many disguised their own gods beneath Christian names. Ogum became St. George, Iansur became St. Barbara, Oshosi became St. Sebastian. This was a way to resist from within. Religious syncretism became an act of survival. But over time, even that was marginalized. To this day, African-based religions in Brazil face attacks, intolerance, and prejudice. The killing of gods continues. It just changed form. Bad hair, ugly skin. Aesthetics as a weapon beyond religion and language, the black body also became a target of erasure. Curly hair was called bad. Wide noses, full lips, dark skin, all ridiculed. To be beautiful meant to look white. Aesthetics became another tool of control, a way to destroy self-worth. Even today, black children grow up hearing that their hair needs to be tamed, that their skin tone is exotic, that they should whiten the race. All of this is a direct legacy of the logic of slavery, the absence of the mirror. And with all of that, what was left was an emptiness. How can you see yourself if nothing around you reflects who you are? How can you love yourself when everything that's yours has been taught to be hated? The enslaved person lived without a mirror, without reference, without voice, and that emptiness was passed down. Many black families grew up knowing nothing of their origins. No stories of grandparents, great-grandparents, kings, queens, villages, dances. Brazil became a country where millions don't know where they came from, who they were, or why. And when school came, it didn't teach them to remember. It taught them to forget even more. For over 100 years, Brazilian textbooks omitted the horrors of slavery, glorified slave owners, ignored Africa as the cradle of civilizations, erased the quilombos, black heroes, revolts. It was as if black people had no past, only pain. That absence gave rise to generations of young black people who thought they had no history, only suffering. But not everything was erased. African culture survived, in the songs, in the beat of the drums, in recipes, in the oryxas, in the accents, in the bodies that keep dancing, even while bleeding. It lived on, in the hands that braid hair, in the priestesses who heal, in the sacred yards that persist, in the names that are coming back. Identity was attacked, but never fully destroyed. Because identity can't be killed. It only falls asleep, and one day wakes up. And that awakening is happening now. When you erase a people's history, you create a deep trauma, a trauma of origin, an existential wound. Psychologists often call it disenfranchised grief. It's growing up not knowing who to mourn. It's missing something you never even knew. It's searching for what was stolen without knowing where to look. That void affects self-esteem, emotional bonds, faith belonging. And even today, millions of black people live trying to fit into molds that were never made for them. All of this began the moment the name was changed, the god was killed, the language was silenced. But if the soul was erased and the body was beaten, what was left of the enslaved person when freedom was declared by the Golden Law? In the next chapter, we'll see what truly happened after abolition. Freedom with no home, no land, no school, no justice. And how Brazil abandoned its formerly enslaved, building the modern racism that still haunts us today. They said, "Now you're free." But they gave no land, no roof, no bread, only silence and forgetting. On May 13th, 1888, Princess Isabel signed the Golden Law. 2 articles, not a single line about compensation, not one word about housing, not a single mention of education, employment, or justice. The greatest institutional violence in Brazil's history ended on paper, but the structure that upheld it remained standing, a signature without repair. The Golden Law was signed after over 300 years of slavery. And what did it say? Article 1. Slavery is hereby declared extinct in Brazil. Article 2. All contrary provisions are revoked. That's it. No land for the freed, no compensation for decades of forced labor, no protection against the violence they knew was coming. Freedom was given, with no tools to survive, no ground, no roof, no name on paper. Imagine spending your whole life working on a plantation, and one day they tell you you're free, but you have nowhere to live, no food. You can't read or write. You don't have papers, and nobody wants you around. That's what waited for black people after freedom. Many kept working on the same plantations, now for scraps. Others were kicked off the land. They moved to the outskirts of the cities, and there the first hills, tenements and favelas were born, the birth of urban exclusion. While the white elite began building a modern society, the formerly enslaved were left outside of it. They couldn't vote. They couldn't study. They had nowhere to live. The city advanced, but without the black population, and that neglect wasn't by accident. It was a project. Early public policies of the Republic focused on European immigrants, seen as more fit for civilization. Freed black people were treated as a social problem, legalized racism. After abolition, racism didn't disappear, it simply changed names. It became vagrancy laws, criminalizing unemployed black people, sanitation policies, ethnic cleansing of cities, urban progress, forced removals of black communities. All of this with state approval. Exclusion was built brick by brick, and the cruelest part, it was never acknowledged, never admitted. Education for a few, while the children of the elite went to school, to universities and even to Europe. The children of the formerly enslaved grew up with no access to education. Most black families spent generations unable to read or write, and that wasn't coincidence. It was part of the plan, to keep inequality in place. Because if you can't read, you don't question. If you can't write, you don't speak out. If you don't study, you don't compete. For decades, Brazil blocked black people from accessing spaces of power. Job market, doors closed. After slavery ended, Brazil opened its borders to European immigrants, Italians, Germans, Poles, Spaniards. They arrived with government incentives, land, housing, work contracts. Meanwhile, freed black people were labeled unskilled, lazy, incapable. Slavery had ended, but the stigma remained, and that logic passed through generations. Even today, black Brazilians earn less, have fewer leadership roles, and are underrepresented in prestigious careers. It all started the day after abolition. At the exact moment the state turned its back. Erased from official history over time, abolition became a national myth. Princess Isabel was called the Redeemer. Schools taught that Brazil was a peaceful country, without racism, without segregation, and black people erased. The fight of the Quilombos, the leaders of revolts, black intellectuals, all removed from history books. The idea was simple. Forget it, move on. But how do you move on when the road is still filled with stones? How do you get over something that was never repaired? The trauma of incomplete freedom. That false freedom left deep scars. The belief that black people should be grateful, the feeling of not belonging, the constant fear of rejection, institutional distrust, lack of positive representation, all of it stems from historical abandonment. There was no transition, no repair, only rupture, and the pieces were scattered across every corner of Brazil. The fight goes on. Despite it all, black people resisted. They created religious brotherhoods, founded schools, organized social clubs, launched newspapers, built urban quilombos. They fought in the streets, in the favelas, in the universities. Every victory was won with effort, sweat, and blood. But the question remains, why has Brazil never truly wanted to repair what it caused? And if you think slavery is over, just wait to see how it disguised itself. In the next chapter, we'll dive into the quilombos, symbols of resistance, humanity, and real freedom. Because while the state abandoned them, quilombolas created a new way of life, one where the body, the soul, and the gods could be free. Even if just for a moment, we didn't run to live. We ran so we wouldn't die inside. And there, deep in the forest, we built what the slave quarters never allowed: freedom. While the plantation masters were building fences of power, black men and women were crossing jungles, rivers, and moonless nights, chasing the impossible. A place where they could truly exist. Those places existed. They were called quilombos, and they weren't just hideouts. They were entire communities with laws, religion, agriculture, music, education. They were islands of dignity in an ocean of oppression. A quilombo was a community founded by black people who escaped slavery. They also welcomed indigenous people, poor whites, persecuted Jews, abused women. Above all, quilombos were places of collective resistance. They were built in strategic locations, deep in the forest, on high ground, near fresh water springs, far from official routes. They knew if they were found, they'd be destroyed. So they organized to stay hidden and to defend themselves. The most famous of all quilombos was Palmares in the state of Alagoas. At its height, it gathered over 20,000 people. There they had agriculture, homes, commerce, an army, religious temples, and decision-making councils. It was a black city, free, autonomous, alive. And from there came a name that would echo for centuries: Zumbi. Zumbi of Palmares wasn't just a warrior. He was a symbol of leadership, strategy, and faith. And by his side stood an equally powerful figure: Dandara, a woman, a fighter, a mother, a strategist. Zumbi and Dandara led Palmares in resistance against Portuguese invasions for over 90 years. Yes, 90 years of resistance. But freedom has always come at a price, and Palmares paid dearly. In 1694, after many failed attempts, the settlement was destroyed by the bandeirante Domingos Jorge Velho, with backing from the Portuguese crown. Zumbi was killed. Dandara, captured, chose to throw herself from a cliff rather than return to slavery. But even after its destruction, the name survived. Zumbi became a symbol, Palmares became a living legend, and quilombos, though persecuted, never stopped existing. What schoolbooks often don't teach is that quilombos still exist today. There are over 6,000 officially recognized quilombola communities in Brazil, scattered across the countryside of Pará, Bahia, Maranhão, Goiás, Minas Gerais, Tocantins, and many other states. In these communities, African culture remains alive. Cuisine rooted in African traditions, preserved religious rituals, oral storytelling passed down through generations, community organization inspired by ancestral councils of elders. Modern quilombos are not remnants. They are rebirths. They are proof that black people didn't wait for freedom. They built it themselves. While official Brazil chose not to see, quilombolas grew their own food, raised their children, defended their territory, educated their young, protected their traditions. In those places, black people became the subjects of their own stories, not just objects within them. But the fight continues. Even today, quilombolas face land invasions, violence from land grabbers, institutional racism, lack of access to healthcare, education, and sanitation, bureaucratic hurdles to gain legal title to their land. The freedom won yesterday is still under threat today. When a Quilombola community resists, it's not just defending land, it's defending living memory. An ancestral right. A Quilombo is not just a place. It's an idea, a verb, a shout, a gesture of defiance against erasure. When a Quilombola mother teaches her child the name of an Orixa, when a Quilombola youth plants manioc in his grandmother's soil, when a tambor de crioula drumbeat echoes through the countryside, that's Palmares beating once again. But not everyone managed to escape. Most remained behind, beaten in silence, swallowing fear, learning to smile just to survive. In the next chapter, we'll see how slavery didn't end with abolition. It just changed clothes and still lives on through modern racism that imprisons without chains and kills without leaving a mark. The whipping post is gone from the town square, but the skin still trembles. The overseer's whip disappeared from his hand, but the fear still walks the streets. The plantations were never redistributed. The big houses were never dismantled. Freed black people were never brought into positions of power. The slave quarters simply changed form. They became favelas, urban slums, prisons, underpaid jobs, and the most dangerous part, it became normal. Today, no one openly says black people are inferior. But how many times is a black candidate rejected and they say it was just the profile? How many black women are ignored in stores? How many young black men are searched daily on the streets, in subways, on the sidewalks of wealthy neighborhoods? There are no more chains, but there is suspicion. There's no more whipping post. But there is exclusion. Modern racism is more subtle, and because of that, harder to fight. Racism in Brazil isn't just individual prejudice. It's a structure built to preserve privilege and inequality. It's a system that pushes the black majority to the margins, offers poor education to their children, keeps black students out of universities, closes the doors to formal jobs, uses state violence as a tool of control. Brazil is still run by the same logic of the old big house. You can enter, but only to serve. Some numbers show this with brutal clarity. Over 75% of homicide victims in Brazil are black people hold less than 5% of leadership roles in the country's 500 biggest companies. Even with affirmative action, most top university programs are still mostly white black women earn the least and suffer the most from lack of healthcare and social protection. This isn't coincidence, it's consequence, it's continuity. In Brazil, being black means being at risk. Even while doing nothing, black people are stopped more often by police. They're arrested faster. They receive harsher sentences. They're killed without trial. How many kids like João Pedro, Agatha, Claudia, Marcos Vinicius have died just for looking suspicious? The difference between the overseer and the modern police officer is only the uniform. The role remains the same: surveil, restrain, punish. In classrooms, the story of slavery is still told from a distance. Few black teachers, few black authors in textbooks, little space to talk about ancestry, pride, or resistance. Most black children grow up never seeing themselves represented. Meanwhile, beauty standards are still white. The hero is still white. The scientist, the doctor, the politician, the artist, and the black character, they're either silenced or placed in a role of suffering. On TV, in movies, in soap operas, how often do black people appear as the main character? And when they do, what roles are they given? Made criminal comic relief background character Brazil has normalized the black person as the background, the outskirts of the image, the side character in their own story. Modern racism isn't called hate, it's called no offense, but not everything is about race, right? You're being dramatic. Well, with that hair. It's not prejudice, it's just my taste. It's racism dressed as politeness, polished, socially accepted. And because of that, even more dangerous. This daily racism leaves deep wounds. Black people feel out of place. Think twice before speaking, blame themselves when rejected, self-sabotage before even trying. Learn to stay quiet, just to survive. It's the same fear from the slave quarters, the same careful steps not to provoke. The only difference now, there are no chains, just anxiety, sadness, crushed self-esteem, and still, there is resistance. There are voices, there are bodies that dance, there are black pages being written, black movements in the streets, black intellectuals in universities, black artists gaining space, black youth owning the internet, black mothers founding NGOs, black children learning their worth. The modern slave quarters still exist, but more and more people are leaving them, with heads held high. Brazil isn't racist by accident, it's racist by origin, by foundation, by design. And racism will only be defeated when it's treated for what it really is, a project. And every project can be undone if there's courage, if there's memory, if there's voice. But Dee, what if I told you this pain isn't just in the mind, that the black body carries the marks of slavery in its DNA? In the next chapter, we'll dive into the science of inherited trauma, epigenetics, toxic stress, and the pain passed down from generation to generation, even without words, even without memory. Because the body never forgets what history tries to hide. They say time heals everything. But how do you heal something that's written into the body? How do you cure what science now shows can be inherited, like eye color, blood type, or skin tone? For a long time, people believed the past couldn't affect us directly, that what our ancestors lived through didn't impact our bodies today. But science has proven otherwise. Today, we know that deep trauma leaves marks that travel across generations. And those marks aren't just emotional. They are biological, molecular, physical. What is epigenetics? Epigenetics is the study of how life, experiences, and environment can change the way your genes behave without changing your DNA sequence. This means you might be born with a normal gene, but depending on the environment you live in or your ancestors lived in, that gene can be switched on or off in different ways. It's like a volume knob. Genetics gives you the radio. Epigenetics controls the sound. How does this connect to slavery? Studies with descendants of people who went through extreme trauma, like war, concentration camps, or slavery, show clear epigenetic effects. Elevated stress levels, altered immune system function, difficulty handling frustration, higher risk of depression and anxiety, issues with memory, attention, and sleep. More intense emotional reactions to perceived threats. In other words, the body reacts as if it's still in danger, even if that danger happened generations ago. Study on descendants of Jewish Holocaust survivors showed that children and grandchildren had higher cortisol levels, the stress hormone, and specific epigenetic alterations. Study on descendants of enslaved people in the US found changes in genes linked to emotional regulation, fear, and pain. Studies in Brazil with quilombola and favela communities reveal that chronic social stress caused by exclusion and racism affects brain development in children from a very early age. These marks are survival responses, but they are also open wounds. The body remembers what the mind forgets. Many black people have never heard the stories of their ancestors. They don't know the names. They don't know the pain. And yet, they feel a weight they can't explain, constant fear, a sense of always being on alert, muscle tension, insomnia. Anxiety attacks, difficulty trusting, sadness with no clear cause. This isn't weakness. It's the body responding to ancient trauma, inherited trauma. When pain becomes behavior, this inherited trauma also shapes ways of thinking and acting. Strict parents who raise their kids with toughness out of fear they won't survive in the world. Mothers teaching their children to lower their heads even when they're right. Young people feeling guilty for wanting to succeed, as if they're betraying their own deep distrust of institutions, a feeling of not belonging in white spaces. All of this is epigenetic. All of this is historical. All of this began long before you were born. If this pain goes unrecognized, it becomes a cycle. Parents don't know they're teaching fear. They think they're teaching caution. Children don't understand why they feel suffocated. Schools don't make space. Society doesn't listen. And so the silence of the slave quarters continues. Inside homes, inside minds, inside bones. But is healing possible? Yes. But healing doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from remembering, from knowing maybe the pain I feel isn't only mine. It comes from naming the pain, from telling the story, from looking in the mirror and seeing more than suffering, seeing strength, seeing survival, seeing a miracle. Because whoever carries the blood of someone who survived slavery was born victorious. Healing happens when we have access to racially aware therapy, psychologists who understand the historical context of Black people. There's real mental health care in Black communities. We teach children about ancestry from a young age. Families become spaces of love and emotional safety. There's real representation in media. We build safe spaces for Black bodies to rest. Healing inherited trauma is an act of revolution. It's building a future that isn't born from fear, but from truth. But how do we heal if the state never apologized? How do we move forward if the debt was never paid? In the next chapter, we'll talk about historical reparations, what Brazil should have done, what it can still do, and what happens when a country refuses to face the crime it committed for over 300 years. Being Black and surviving in Brazil is already resistance, but being Black and healing, that's revolution. After so many chapters of pain, we need to say this: Black people are not only suffering, we are also rebirth. We are beauty, creation, and strength. The trauma of slavery ran deep, but Black people didn't just survive it. We created art, music, faith, science, leadership, and healing. Healing is not forgetting, it's remembering with awareness and refusing to let pain dictate the next generations. Trauma can only be healed once it's recognized. It's not playing the victim. It's not drama. It's not exaggeration. It's history. It's genetics. It's social. It's real. When a Black person starts to understand where their fear, guilt, anger, and sadness come from, they begin to break the cycle. They realize that much of what they feel isn't personal failure. It's collective inheritance. Reconnection is the antidote. Speaking the names of the Oryxars again, learning African surnames again, knowing where our grandparents came from, understanding our roots, dishes, rhythms, dances. Reconnecting with ancestry is a way to resist erasure. Because when you know where you came from, no one can convince you that you're worth nothing. Changing education is part of the healing process. Teaching about Africa before slavery. Honoring Black heroes, including Black authors in school literature, discussing racism early on, recognizing the value of Afro-Brazilian culture. Education isn't just about content, it's also about representation, and representation heals. Therapy as liberation. More and more Black therapists are specializing in racial trauma. They listen without judgment. They name pain that once felt vague. They teach that crying isn't weakness, it's freedom. Therapy isn't a luxury, it's a survival strategy. And for Black people, it's a weapon against silence. When a child sees a Black doctor, they understand they can become one too. When a young person sees a Black judge, they know they can be respected. When a Black girl sees a Black artist proudly loving her hair, she feels beautiful too. The Black body needs to see itself. In the world, on TV, in books, in politics. Because when you don't see yourself, you disappear. But when you do, you rise. Black culture has always been a tool for healing. The drum heals, the capoeira circle heals, samba heals, poetry heals, faith in the Oryxars heals, rap heals, funk heals too, braiding hair, storytelling, gathering the family on Sundays. Every one of these rituals is a piece of collective healing. For centuries, black people were taught to feel shame about themselves. Today, healing means celebrating what was once condemned: curly hair, wide noses, dark skin, rural accents, the beat of the drum. African names, the dance that moves the whole body. Black pride isn't superiority, it's recovery, it's self-esteem restored. Healing also happens when we meet each other, when we look into another black person's eyes and say, "I see you, I understand you, I recognize you." We create spaces of affection, listening, and connection. Spaces where black people don't have to explain themselves, don't have to protect themselves all the time, don't have to shrink to fit in. These are modern quilombos, emotional fortresses. It's teaching your kids to love themselves, treating trauma not as weakness, but as a wound, embracing your history with everything it holds, refusing crumbs, demanding a seat at the table, sitting proudly, head held high, dreaming of a future, and building it. Healing is not a destination, it's a process, and every step counts. But full healing requires more than individual awareness. It demands historical justice. In the next and second to last chapter, we'll talk about reparations. What does Brazil owe to the descendants of enslaved people? Is it possible to pay this debt? And why is there still so much resistance to doing so? There is no real peace without justice. There is no fair future in a country that refuses to repair a past built on blood and exploitation. Throughout this journey, we've seen how slavery wasn't just a moment in history. It was a system that shaped everything: society, cities, the job market, the national mindset. We've seen how it left marks on the body, on the soul, on official records, on the silence, on what's missing. But now it's time to ask the hardest question of all. What does Brazil still owe to the descendants of enslaved people? More than 300 years of slavery, more than 5 million people kidnapped, forced labor, rape, deaths, violence, stolen identities. And when slavery ended, the state gave nothing. No land, no school, no home, no compensation. Worse, they compensated slave owners for losing their property. Yes, in Brazil, those who lost their right to be free were ignored, and those who lost the right to enslave were paid. This is the deepest wound in Brazilian history. Reparation is not revenge. It's not about flipping roles. It's not punishment. It's the recognition that a crime occurred, and that the consequences of that crime still exist today. Reparation means investing in public policies for the black population, guaranteeing real access to education, housing, healthcare, and justice. Officially recognizing slavery as a historical genocide, protecting Quilombola and traditional territories, building memorials, museums, statues, and spaces of memory. Saying clearly, this was a crime, and we are correcting it. Racial quotas in universities and civil service are some of the few reparation tools Brazil has implemented. They don't give an advantage, they give equal starting lines, because the starting point was never the same, and the results are clear. More black students in universities, more black professionals in fields once off limits, more self-esteem, more representation, more future. But still, there is resistance, because acknowledging the debt means taking off the blindfold. It means admitting that this country was built on the brutal exploitation of a people, and that challenges the myth of racial democracy. It wounds white pride. It shakes the illusion of a friendly Brazil. To repair is to rethink privilege, to accept that inequality is historical, that some have always had a head start. Many would rather cling to the comfort of denial than face the truth of repair. Germany paid reparations to Holocaust survivors. Canada issued public apologies to indigenous peoples for centuries of genocide. The United States is actively debating reparation policies at state and federal levels. South Africa created Truth and Reconciliation Commissions after apartheid. And Brazil, to this day, has never issued a formal apology, has never recognized slavery as a crime against humanity, has never delivered justice. First of all, the country needs to look in the mirror. Include the real history of slavery in schools. Protect symbols of Afro-Brazilian culture. Fight institutional racism with real actions. Ensure black men and women have access to spaces of power. Reparation isn't just financial. It's moral, it's political, it's symbolic, it's historical. More than correcting the past, reparation is about making sure the future is different. A country that repairs, rebuilds trust, heals wounds, prevents new mistakes, teaches the truth, creates a sense of belonging. Without reparations, the trauma keeps repeating, generation after generation. If you've made it this far, you can start today. Learn more. Question your privileges. Listen to black voices. Share knowledge. Don't laugh at racist jokes. Support black-led movements. Vote with awareness. Reparation doesn't depend only on the state. It begins with every choice, every conversation, every action. Can Brazil still become a just country? Yes, but only if it has courage. Courage to face the past, courage to change the present, courage to say, we were wrong, and we won't pretend it didn't happen. For over 300 years, Brazil screamed with the whip and silenced with fear. Today, those who inherited that pain are raising their voices. Today, those who carry the trauma are reconnecting with healing. And now that you've watched this story, you can't say you didn't know. Now that you've heard it, what will you do with this truth?